The stages of listening to Boise State Public Radio podcasts. Step 1, testing the waters. You tune into an episode or two. Nothing too serious. Step 2, you got a little hooked on one of those series like Extremely American or Scandalized, and now you're binging. No judgment, but you did listen to it in one day. Step 3, now you're subscribed to a feed. You get notifications to your phone every time there's a new daily episode of The Connector or Idaho Matters. I see where this is going. Step 4, you realize how much time you're spending with Boise State Public Radio podcasts and the fact that it doesn't cost you a dime. Step 5, you decide to step up and support your podcast listening because you can, because you want to, not because you have to. All right, now's the time, you podcast fan you. Go to boisestatepublicradio.org and click donate to support your love of Boise State Public Radio podcast listening today.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Last week, the Idaho Legislature came to Boise to get ready for the 2025 session. They got together to decide who will lead the key positions when things officially start up in January. Now, there were some key leadership positions open after the November election, especially for the supermajority GOP, which holds 90 of the 105 seats in the Idaho Legislature. So joining us now to talk about what happened during the organizational session and also what it means is Clark Corbin with Idaho Capital Sun. Hi, Clark.
Hey, Gemma. How are you doing?
I'm good. Okay, so let's just start with the basics. What is an organizational session?
Yeah, for sure. And so the Idaho Legislature has an organizational session every 2 years following the general election, right? We just finished up with the general election in November, and that's when all of the legislators were elected. And so the organizational session takes place between the election and between when the legislative session begins for real, which is going to be January 6th this year. And it's all about, Gemma, doing kind of the procedural things to get ready to hit the ground running in January. And so it's things like electing members of leadership, which we'll get into and talk about why that's important. The 18 new members elected to the legislature were sworn in and took the oath of office. And then they made committee assignments for both the committee chairpersons, who have a lot of influence and clout in the legislature, as well as the rest of the rank and file committee assignments for each of the 105 legislators. So it was really about coming together and finding out who's going to play what role where when the session begins. And a lot of the organizational session took place behind closed doors when it comes to the leadership elections and the committee selection process. But it's super, super important in terms of who has influence, Gemma, over what bills go forward and also what bills don't go forward.
So you noted leadership positions, Clark, and Republicans had a couple of really big leadership posts to fill. So tell us what they were and also why were they open this year?
Yeah, definitely. When we talk about leadership, that's the highest ranking members of the body, and it's broken down by House and Senate, and then further broken down between Republicans and Democrats. And as you mentioned, Republicans once again have a giant supermajority. It'll be 90-15 this year. But the real action was in the Idaho Senate for the Republicans. Out of the 4-person leadership team, they had 2 open seats this year. The very top leadership position, which is the Senate President Pro Tem's position, was open because former Senate President Pro Tem Chuck Winder was defeated in his May primary election. They also had the assistant majority leader position open because former Senator Abby Lee did not run for re-election and ended up resigning from the legislature over the summer. And so 2 key spots out of 4 were up for grabs with the Republican Senate leadership team. And that was kind of where a lot of the action and influence was concentrated with that election there. Gemma. And so the result was, for the first time in 4 years, the Idaho Senate is going to be under new leadership. State Senator Kelly Anthony, a Republican
Hmm.
from Burley, was elected Senate President pro tem on Wednesday night, and then it was made official. He was sworn in on Thursday, and then there were a couple of other sort of changes all throughout Senate leadership because um, of those openings and what they created. And so I can kind of run through them. But the top position, like I said, went to Kelly Anthony, Republican from Burley. And then there was kind of this cascading effect where they were all new leadership positions in the
Hmm.
Senate. Senate Majority Leader, the new Senate Majority Leader is going to be Lori Den Hartog, a Republican from Meridian. The new Senate Assistant Majority Leader is Mark Harris, a Republican from Soda Springs. And then the new Senate Caucus Chair is Senator Ben Taves, a Republican from Coeur d'Alene. So even though they had two open positions because of kind of the competition and the sorting of ranks, there's actually four new. Everybody is in a new leadership position this year on the Republican side. And so that'll be really something interesting to watch in terms of, do the dynamics of the Idaho Senate change at all this year, Gemma?
So Clark, I know. I mean, you were at the state house every day during the session. You follow this very closely. The average person, we might follow a bill here or there, right? And so,
Right.
with that said, why is the job of Senate President pro tem so important?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. It's the highest ranking position, and so they have a lot of influence behind the scenes over what bills move forward, what bills don't. They get to select the committee assignments for other members, but then there's some real kind of specific things about the Senate President pro tem position. Specifically, the Senate President pro tem presides over the Idaho Senate, sitting in the big chair, banging the gavel when the lieutenant governor is away. And the Senate President pro tem is second in line of succession behind to the governor, behind only the lieutenant governor. And then in instances where both the governor and the lieutenant governor are out of the state, the Senate President pro tem serves as acting governor and has the
Hmm.
authority and power of the office of the governor. And we do see that from time to time where both the governor and the lieutenant governor are out of state, and we do have the Senate President pro
Hmm.
tem serving in that acting position. So it's a high-ranking position. It has some specific responsibilities under the Idaho Constitution, and then sort of all the clout and influence that comes with being the overall top ranking Republican. You can kind of think of the Idaho legislature as the state's version of Congress. And so it's kind of
Hmm.
a comparison along those lines, kind of our local version of Congress, and it's setting the local state laws and passing the local budget for all the state departments and state agencies there, Gemma.
So I want to turn to the minority party, the Democrats, Clark, because they also have leadership positions. And my understanding is they had to fill a leadership position as well this for this upcoming session.
Yeah, absolutely. Democrats also had elections. In the Idaho Senate, it was real easy. No changes to the Democratic leadership in the Idaho Senate. Senator Melissa Winthrop has retained her top ranking position, as have all the other Democrats in the Senate. But in the House, a little bit of a different story. Right off the bat, House Minority Leader Alana Rebel, a Boise Democrat, did retain her position as the highest ranking Democrat. But from there were a couple of changes. And that was set off because former Assistant Minority Leader Lauren Necochea did not run for re-election this year. She's the chair of the Democratic Party for the state of Idaho, but she didn't run for re-election to the Idaho legislature. So that created an opening, and Representative Steve Birch, a Boise Democrat, was named House Assistant Minority Leader, and then Representative Todd Achilles, another Boise Democrat, was named to the other House Democratic leadership position. That's the Minority Caucus Chair. And the reason that Representative Achilles got that position, because the representative who formerly held that position, Representative Ned Burns, was defeated in the November election.
Hmm.
So a couple of changes on the House side with two new Democrats in leadership spots there as well to keep an eye on for the upcoming session, Gemma.
And then there are committees, Clark. And so you have leadership positions on committees. Let's talk about the House Education Committee. They got a new chairperson. Who is it? And why is this committee important?
Yeah, absolutely. This committee is important because over the last several years, a lot of the bills that have to do with private school choice go through that committee. Now, not all of them, and we can talk about that for a minute. But yes, the previous House Education Committee chair, Representative Christy Yamamoto, um, lost her reelection bid, and so that position was open. And so the new House Education Chair going forward for the 2025 legislative session is Representative Douglas Pickett. He's a Republican from Oakley. He's a rancher by profession, and he's a relatively new lawmaker. It's just his second term, and so it's a little bit unusual for kind of some of the more newer legislators to have those committee leaderships, but it's a different direction for the House Education Committee. Mm-hmm. And looking at our friends at Idaho Education News, specifically Kevin Richard, he talked about how Representative Pickett is probably a more conservative chair, probably a more conservative leader of that House Education Committee chair than the previous Representative Yamamoto, Representative Julie Yamamoto. And so a change there, perhaps a change in philosophy. And I think one of the things that people will be watching is if we know that House Speaker Mike Moyle has said that he wants a private school choice bill to pass this year. And so I think that there's a sense that Representative Pickett might be a little bit more open to some of those private school choice proposals. Which could be some of the bigger proposals kind of defining the upcoming legislative session there. Representative Yamamoto was really prioritized traditional neighborhood public schools in her approach to running the House Education Committee in the previous several years. And so the legislature didn't pass a major sweeping private school choice bill over the last couple of years. And so with a new perhaps more conservative chair in the House Education spot, and perhaps a more conservative vice chair as well. I think that people will be looking for perhaps a private school choice bill to advance out of that committee. And we do know that there's probably going to be several private school choice bills this session, Gemma. We've seen them in the past, kind of vouchers under a different name. Education tax credits, education savings accounts that would allow parents or families to take a share of state funding that they receive and put it towards tuition at a private school, including a religious private school. That would be a change in policy for the state of Idaho. And we expect several different bills on that topic this year that could be routed through that committee or could be sent through a different committee for political reasons, Gemma.
So, Clark, I've got a little bit less than 2 minutes with you, and I want to know this. After the November elections, do you think we're going to see a legislature that is more conservative or less conservative than the last few years? And I ask this question because even though we are a majority Republican legislature, there's been a lot of infighting with the more, far-right Republicans to the more, moderate Republicans.
Yeah, there sure has. There has been a lot of fighting within the Republican Party over the last several years. I do think that it is going to be a more conservative Idaho legislature this year for a couple of reasons. One is the November election, simple math, the Republicans picked up 3 seats from the Democrats. And so there's fewer Democrats. There's going to be 1 fewer Democrat on the House Education Committee. And so Democrats really, all they were able to do was have just 2 members on many of the legislative committees, where in some committees they had 3 before. And so there's fewer Democrats. And there's some key committee changes. And so even though there's been quite a battle within the Republican Party and a lot of division within the Republican Party, I do expect overall, because of the raw numbers, because of the increase in the Republican supermajority, I expect a more conservative Idaho legislature this year for the next 2 years, Gemma.
All right. Well, as always, Clark, really appreciate your analysis on this. We've been speaking with Clark Corbin with Idaho Capital Sun about last week's organizational session of the Idaho Legislature. We will, of course, put links to Clark's stories on the session on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudet.
If you like podcasts like this, explore more from the Boise State Public Radio podcast family. There you'll find a mix of daily news, Idaho Voices, and in-depth series on a wide range of topics. I'm talking wild horses, political scandals, sustainable ranching, and militia groups in a post-January 6th world. Wherever you get your podcasts, just search Boise State Public Radio to find what Idaho's NPR station has in store for you.